Welcome to the Divorce Recovery Men Over 40 podcast that empowers men with the tools that foster hope, resilience, and growth during and after divorce. Check it out. Welcome everybody out there to Divorce Double episode 13. We have Michael Rhodes on the mic. Mike and I are cohorts from years ago. I remember when Mike was buying his first mic.
This mic here.
Yes.
I did. Yeah. You were one of the first people that I talked to about any of this podcast stuff.
Yep. Mike and Mike. But Mike has a podcast called Rising Phoenix Podcast. He has about over 130 episodes. He helps men out there getting divorced, going through divorce, or recovering from divorce. And he's a busy man. And kind of like me, it's a labor of love. He's got a big Facebook group. He touts himself as world number one website for men going through divorce, which I will say, yes, you are. He's a coach also. He's big into 988 Lifeline chat and text, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So let's go through your story first. And then my first question after that is, what is a Phoenix Warrior? But go ahead.
Very good question. Yeah. So July in 2019 is when my now ex-wife left. We were at the end of June of 2019. We were on vacation. We took a cruise around the Greek Isles, and then we spent 3 days in Rome, Italy. And the day we left to go home, actually a few moments before our last venture on that vacation, going to the Vatican, is when she said she thinks she wants a divorce. And I don't remember much of the Vatican. I can tell you that. I definitely want to go back. And I was a mess for about 3 weeks, and then she finally left and filed. I was suicidal. I was a mess. I was distraught, lost, broken. Every negative emotion. I felt like a failure, a bad father, a bad husband, a bad person. It was the most difficult thing I've ever faced. And I lost my father when I was 22. He was 44, and lung cancer. And he was my biggest supporter, and that was very difficult. But that pales in comparison to going through this divorce stuff.
Wow. What about the Phoenix Warrior? Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So, in addition to, you mentioned I have a Facebook group, which is called Divorce Support for Men, a Rising Phoenix group. Everything I do is sort of branded around Rising Phoenix. And I also have a Discord server. Discord is sort of like an internet chat room forum type of thing. It's a really cool tool, and people can join that for $5 a month, and they get access to the Discord server. We have book clubs. We have weekly meetings a couple times a week. There's different channels that cover books that we read, podcasts that we listen to, different struggles that we're facing. There's a channel that it's called the Anger Channel, where you can go in there and literally you can say whatever you want, and within a few minutes it deletes. There's many tools. It's a really, really great thing for guys. It's just all encompassing dealing with divorce.
Okay. So how did you come to create the Facebook group? What was your...
So, yes. So funny enough, I actually didn't create it. I didn't start it. It was started, I'm actually not 100% sure when, by a gentleman, Lucan is his name. He is South African, if I remember correctly. He started it maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I'm not sure. And when I was going through my divorce, I was looking for resources, help, anything, and I joined that group. And then it started to grow, and he became overwhelmed, and there was some, people, females were being let in, and, not that it's anti-female, but it's for men, right? Yep. And so I reached out and said, hey, can I help? He said, absolutely. And then eventually he just stepped back and I took over. So I've been running it myself, well, not myself, but the sole sort of admin for about 3.5 years, 4 years, something like that. He's still there, but he doesn't do anything. He doesn't participate. But and I'm grateful to him for the opportunity to expand. When I joined, there was roughly 1,500 men in there. Now we're at 7,000. So
it's huge.
It's seen a lot of growth, and it's not always easy, but it's definitely, it's fruitful when I see guys grow and survive and thrive, and then give back a little bit too. It's a pretty awesome thing.
When did the podcast come into play?
It was about a year after my ex left. I joined a program called the Alpha Code. It's a self-development men's program run by a guy in Australia. It's a 12-week program, and it kind of walks you through a bunch of different exercises and steps and things, and it sort of launched me into, okay, now what with your life? Like, you healed a little bit from divorce. Now what are you going to do? And I started thinking, well, I'd love to help men get through this, because when I went through it, my best friend now, he wasn't at the time, he was a friend, but now he's my best friend. He was a guy who I leaned on heavily. And I kept thinking to myself, if it wasn't for him, I don't know if I'd be here. And then I thought about, well, how many men don't have a Chris Long, in their life, and so I started thinking about, well, I'm going to coach men. That was sort of my, what do you want to do now that you graduated from this program? What's your mission in life? It's to coach men. And then I thought, well, who the hell is going to hire me, right? And I thought, I'll start a podcast. And so that's sort of why I started the podcast. I went to life coaching school. I went to John Kim, the Angry Therapist. I went to his life coaching school, had him on the podcast. He graciously came on. And so that's sort of why. But then it was funny, because once I started doing the podcast, I sort of stepped back from my thoughts of coaching. I felt like it's going to be a lot. I think my reach and my the opportunity to help will be much larger if I just focus on this podcast and help guys through that.
Okay. What's some of the biggest hangups that men have going through divorce recovery? I know there's so many hangups. The one I see and I focus on most of the time is self-care. That kind of goes out the window. If you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your kids. Kind of like, when the plane goes down, you put your mask on first and then your kids. And a lot of men don't see that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that's I think there's initially there, depending on who you are, but the patterns I see are, and what I experienced was, I got very angry initially. Like, I was mad at the world. I was certainly mad at her. I seen red everywhere, and I felt this need for revenge, and just I felt betrayed, and all of that was true in some ways, but it kept me stuck. I felt like I wasn't going anywhere, and I see a lot of guys do that. They get angry and they stay there, and that's, you're not going to focus on self-care or growth or trying to heal, any of those things, if you just stay stuck in your anger. I see that more than anything, because anger is second nature to most men. Yep. Because we're taught as little boys, we certainly can't cry. We can't have emotions other than anger. Like, we're told not to cry. We're told to, stop crying, or I'm going to give you something to cry about. That kind of sort of mentality. And so you learn that you can't get emotional, but you can get angry. You can slam a door, and maybe that's okay. Or it's becomes a much more palatable emotion for our parents to deal with, was, in my experience, and I think in a lot of men's experiences, it was anger. And so I see a lot of men that lean on that and stay stuck in anger.
So what, after going through your divorce and healing to a certain point, has that changed your view on life, or the way you interact with people or other females or your kids, or how does that change you? That's a big one.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a great question. I think there are definitely stages, right? And I think that's true of growth in general. Like, you're always going to have steps to climb, a ladder to climb, so to speak. And I think where I am at now versus where I was when it all started is leaps and bounds. And I think I understand a lot more about why people behave the way they behave. I understand a little bit more about how much of an impact your childhood can have on your life, on your ability to handle things. I would say that I'm more compassionate in some ways, and in other ways I'm less tolerant. Just for instance, in that Facebook group, I have all the sympathy in the world and all the empathy in the world for a guy who just started that journey. The guy who, like me, in July of 2019, who was just lost and distraught and angry and just a mess, right? A guy that has been in that group for a year plus, who stays in that angry mindset. I have my sympathy and empathy has a shelf life, I think.
Expiration dates.
Yeah, it does. Because I think at a certain point you have to take responsibility for your life. And if you remain angry despite all the evidence to the contrary, you're doing a disservice to yourself for sure, and your children or whoever is around you in your life, because I think we are pretty good at compartmentalizing our anger, but we're not perfect at it. And so I think it does leak into other parts of your life. But more importantly, in that group, it can taint the group in a way that if a man who is just starting his journey is looking for, support and empathy and sympathy and runs into a wall of anger, well, then it's not really support. So my patience gets a little thin with guys that have been in there a while and just maintain their,
to stay at a certain level.
Yes, just angry at all women. And I get it. I get the anger, but at a certain point, you got to grow up and deal with the underlying emotions. And if you don't, you're doing a disservice to everybody.
What about the F word, baby? Forgiveness. I love that word. How do you handle it, and how do you expect your people you coach try to handle it? Oh, yeah, that was my biggest one. And I figured out forgiveness was almost, or unforgiveness was almost as important as anger, because they're almost tied together. They're cousins. For sure. They are. They're cousins.
They're definitely adjacent, I would say. That's the probably, I don't know which is more difficult to get to a point where you could even think about that or actually get to it. I'm not sure which is more difficult, but it's something I still struggle with. I'm definitely not as angry at her as I was, for sure. I actually sometimes empathize and sympathize with her. Yep. Even though I hate what she did, I sometimes look at her and feel like her life hasn't gotten better by leaps and bounds. In fact, in some ways, I would say it's worse. And I almost sort of empathize and sympathize that she had to make that decision, or that she did make that decision, or whatever. And so, but sometimes, things happen, and I slip back into anger. So I think, one of the things I interviewed Robert Enright. He's like the world's expert on forgiveness. And I interviewed him, and it was one of those things where I kind of knew this, but I wanted to hear it from an expert, and I wanted to ask the question: Is forgiveness somewhere that you arrive at, or is forgiveness an almost not constant, but a conscious effort to re-forgive? And he said it's the latter. It's almost it's a deliberate act that you must perform over and over, because feelings and emotions pop up. You're going to get angry. Things are going to happen. And you have to remind yourself that this is a human, and all the things that he sort of recommends and says. And I think that that's true. I think a lot of things in life are like that. There is never a destination that we arrive at. I don't believe that there's a happiness that, finally I'm happy I'm here. No, because life says, you're happy? All right, here.
Here you go. Bam.
Bam, right in the face. Yeah. You sure you're happy?
Yeah.
I forgive her. And then she, whatever, takes you back to court for something or whatever, right?
Yep.
I think there are things in life that just it may be majority of things, especially mental health type things, emotional type things, where it's not a destination. It's that you arrive at and suddenly that's it. You know, it's much more difficult than that. As sorry as it is to say that, I think it's much more difficult than that.
I think divorce recovery, and I've said this before, is kind of like a parking structure. Do you keep the anger in the parking spaces, or do you allow the parking spaces to be something positive? So with me, I have to consciously remove that anger car from that space. And constantly, I'm changing and I'm reconfiguring the parking garage, because it's a never-ending battle between good and evil, basically. That's what's going on.
Yeah. That's a perfect way to look at it, because I think you're right. That's just the way that life is. The world keeps on spinning. And so things are going to hit us and come at us, and changes and jobs, and, you know, kids grow up and kids have issues and bills. And there's just, life is constantly moving and changing. And therefore the challenges are constantly moving and changing. And so I don't think that you get to somewhere and just, that's it. I'm good. I'm here. I just don't think that exists. Sadly, in some ways, but also, I mean, it's not boring.
No,
you know
it's fluid,
it's not
man.
Boring.
It keeps going.
Yes.
What about guys out there? And this really ticks me off. Even the guys and the moms, or the soon-to-be exes, that are using their kids as pawns. You know, that just drives me nuts. And in Colorado, you have to take a class. So you don't. It's called a parenting class, and it looks like something from 1950s, from like the civil defense days with pink stoves. And it's common sense. It's common sense that the fact we have to take this class, but people do it all the time. It just I don't understand it.
It's sad in so many ways. It's clearly broken humans that are perpetuating their brokenness. It's clearly, you know, a generational thing that they're passing down. I think in some ways, you know, I think there's nothing more sad than that, honestly. You know, they are the innocent party in all this. You know, I was left. I was taken to court. I had to pay child support. I had to give away retirement money. I had to cash out some stuff. But all that said, I wasn't an innocent party. I was not a perfect husband, clearly, because nobody is, right? So I'm not an innocent party. However, those children are a complete innocent party, and it's the process of divorce is hard on them anyway, right? Especially, you know, age matters, but I still think they all struggle no matter what the age. And I think if you're the kind of person that compounds that and makes it even more difficult, I don't know how you can sleep at night. I don't know how you can look in the mirror and think that you're doing a good and just thing. It's one of those things that in some ways you're kind of helpless, right? In some ways, I mean, you can definitely take action. I do think that there is a myth that men largely get screwed. I think that it's changing a good bit. I think in a lot of places, 50-50 is the norm in terms of custody. I think in terms of child support, I think the higher earner gets screwed. It's typically men, but not always. I do think that is a broken system that makes no sense to me. But I think that it's the focus has to be on making sure that they come out of this as unscathed as possible. And if you don't do that, I'm not a religious guy, but if I were, I would hope that there was a very, really hot place in hell for you to hang out in.
Damn. I am.
Well, I just think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard enough on them.
Yep. Don't make it harder. Yeah.
Amen.
So I am a second generation divorcee. My parents are divorced. I'm divorced. And one of my biggest hangups at the beginning was, what's going to happen to my kids? What am I showing my children for their future? Will they get married, get divorced? But I overcame that from the standpoint of, I'm a firm believer that you don't stay in it for the kids, because they know. They know. You know, if it's a toxic area, get divorced, move on, raise your kids. You see, all my posts are almost always be the best father you can be. And just go from there. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I do struggle with that one a little bit sometimes because I do think that in general, I'm generalizing, I think all problems can be solved. But the problem is both people want to solve it. Yeah. I think human conflict is solvable, right? But both parties have to want to. And I think if you have children, you should want to solve it and fix it. That said, you can't control what another person does.
Correct.
You know, yep. If she or he or whatever, just they don't have the appetite to change. If all they do is point the fingers at you only and don't see their part in the failings or the fallacies of the marriage, then there's little you can do. And I do think that as hard as divorce is, I'm sure that being in a toxic, certainly abusive, and I don't mean just physical, I mean verbal, mental, all that kind of good stuff. I think then absolutely, part ways and I think this is one of the things I tell guys all the time is you control your environment. And so regardless of whatever, because I see this stuff a lot too, where she's introducing a new guy, she's making him
all the time. Gosh.
Yes, all the time.
All the time.
She's making the kids call him daddy, or all these terrible things. But there again, I go back to this all the time. You cannot control someone else. You can only control yourself. So your mission is to create an environment that at least one space where they have your place that is safe, that is sort of anti what's going on anywhere else, where you show them how to be. You make sure that you're doing as best you can all the right things to counteract what's going on over there. My buddy Chris, who I mentioned, he talked about, he calls it damage control. He did it. He had 2 daughters. He did it for years, where he would have to do damage control. They would go through something over there, and he would have to sort of, mend them and talk to them, and this is not how it goes, and this is not what we do here, or whatever. To give them that safe space, to give them that place that is going to allow them to grow and heal. That's all that you can do. You can't control what goes on somewhere else. You just can't.
That's almost half the post on Facebook, by far.
It is.
And I see you reply, I reply, and you can't change. You can only do your environment, and sometimes you can do a half-ass doing that because
true, and that's right. And if you're focusing on what's going on elsewhere, then your ability to create that space is limited because you're not paying attention to what's going on inside your 4 walls. You're worried about what's going on there. And a lot of guys get stuck in that because it allows them to not feel. Again, it goes back to that anger thing where they're just, rather than be hurt by the mother of their children behaving like a fool, they're angry about it. And I get it, but if we were better equipped to manage our emotions, we would sit with that. We would be sad about that and feel that. And then we would go, well, but ain't shit I can do about it except for take care of my 4 walls and my space to make sure that I can counteract whatever's going on over there. So,
and then offshoot of that, dealing with a narcissistic soon-to-be ex or ex, that's a tough one too. That's almost like a side note of that. And it's tough. Like, once again, you can only control what goes on in your 4 walls.
Yeah, and I've never dealt with that, luckily. I mean, she called me that, right? But
you've heard the stories, man. We've seen the bad stories on Facebook, and some of those stories, man, my heart breaks. And,
it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible. And they don't realize the damage. They're trying to, you kind of said earlier, like using a kid as a pawn in some ways, making, there's a gentleman not too long ago, and we do see a lot of these, but not too long ago, actually, maybe even today, but there was one a little bit, couple weeks, month ago where, that was the story was she's making the daughter call the new guy daddy. Yeah. And it's infuriating, but what can you do? And I think if I remember correctly, he was like, he was very abrupt with the young child to say, you do not call anyone else daddy. But that, he's not wrong per se, but like you're putting the kid even further in the middle.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to hear it either. I wouldn't. But again, you can't control that. And if you're putting the kid in the middle when you do those kinds of things. And I know that would be hard. I haven't had to deal with that. She did date for a little while, but there was no call me daddy type stuff. So I can't speak from experience on that one, but I just know right from wrong, and you can't make the kid feel even more worse and more confused. But it would be a challenge for sure.
Yeah,
and,
you can't
and
make
again,
you can't make the kid pay for her transgressions, and sometimes that's the only avenue that men have, but they shouldn't do it.
No, they shouldn't. And I get it in some ways. You know, they feel helpless. They feel like they're being replaced. That's one I hear all the time. And let me emphatically say this: a father can't be replaced. Period.
Yep.
A father that's in your life can't be replaced. Obviously, if someone takes a hike, someone can step in, and many men have, and they're heroes for doing it. But if you're an active person in their life, you can't be replaced.
Nope.
Period. There's never going to be another dad, and some guys feel like that, and I totally understand that. But it's one of the mental gymnastics you have to do to remind yourself of that fact that there might be another person there, but that's not dad.
And I'll also add into that, if you're being the best dad you can be to your ability and you're making those everlasting memories, you don't have to worry about her calling somebody daddy. That should be the last thing in your mind.
True.
So one of my biggest things that you talk about is, and you beat guys up on this one, is work on yourself first. What are some of the ways that men can work on themselves?
I think you have to know yourself first and foremost. And so what does that mean? That's a very nebulous, what does that mean? I think you have to know your childhood in terms of how did it affect your behaviors. So I think it's tricky to rely upon what she says were the reasons for the divorce, but you do have to pay attention to those because they can give you clues. But I think in general, if you gave the silent treatment, that's what I did. Mm-hmm. Understanding that's, and I didn't know this at the time. It's a longer story than I'll probably tell here, but it was how I coped with my childhood, and I took that into my adulthood. And that's not a sound strategy for having a healthy relationship. And so I think first and foremost is sort of know yourself. Why did I do that? And I, with the help of a therapist, I sort of understood, okay, this is why I behaved in that way. Not to point fingers at my parents or blame them, although that could be, it's justifiable, but it gets you nowhere. But just to understand yourself and to take pressure off yourself, because I think too often what happens is, especially we lean on what they say and we feel really, really bad about ourselves, and we beat ourselves up. And I think if we're able to sort of understand why we have some of the behaviors that we have, then it doesn't mean that we're broken, that we're a bad person, a bad husband. It just means we're given bad tools or no tools. And so I think that's first and foremost is trying to understand yourself, understand the why of it, and then fix it. I gave the silent treatment, and it's very difficult for me to have difficult conversations sometimes. And so I work on that constantly. And sometimes it feels like it's constant. And sometimes I fail at it miserably, like very bad.
But you're trying though, you're trying. So
yeah. And I'm aware. That's step one, right? If you're aware, okay. And then you can say, well, why? So you don't beat yourself up and say, well, I'm just a coward or whatever, right? That was my defense mechanism as a child. And I carried it into adulthood. And then you can work on it. And it doesn't mean you're going to fix it overnight. And I won't know if I've fixed it, quote unquote, and I probably will never ever completely until I get into another relationship, and I haven't so far. But I do know that I don't want to be that way because I do think that was a large contributing factor to my divorce. Not solely at all, but it was a contributing factor. And even if I never get married again and it's just a long-term relationship, I don't want to repeat the past. I just don't, because if I do, then what was it all for? If I can't learn and grow from this, then it was all for nothing. All that pain and misery and suicidal thoughts that I had was for nothing. It has to lead to something, and that something for me has to be an improvement in how I deal with other humans so I can have good relationships going forward. So just be introspective, ask a lot of questions. For God's sakes, get into therapy. In my view, get into therapy. Learn yourself, your triggers, your habits, and find out whether or not they're healthy or not. And if they're not, change them as best you can.
So generally, how were you able to table those suicidal thoughts or those notions?
Oh, boy. I think, first and foremost was probably thinking of my children.
Yep.
But sadly, when you're in those moments, you don't have those thoughts. At least they don't, like right then and there. You're not thinking clearly. Obviously. So that sort of gets you, sort of snaps you out a little bit, or it can. Honestly, I went and got help. I went to crisis. I got in with a psychiatrist and a psychologist. I got on medication for a little bit, for about a year or so. I took Lexapro, which is antidepressant. I did get off it eventually, but yeah, I needed it. I asked for help. That's what got me away from those thoughts more than anything. Obviously, like I said, there were moments of thinking, I'm going to miss my kids, but man, I'll never see them again if I walk out in front of that truck, which is my plan. I don't have firearms, so I live at the bottom of a hill, and it's a fairly busy road. A lot of big old trucks come down that hill, and that was my thought. And I thought, well, that's not gonna solve any. It's gonna take your pain away, but you're gonna bingo. You're gonna give that pain to other folks. So, but I asked for help. That was one of the best things I ever did, for sure.
So before I got divorced, I used to say that suicide was so selfish. People did it. They were selfish. But once you hit that rock bottom and you have no way out, you can't say that, man. I learned a lot about hitting rock bottom. And you see why people talk about that. It's so prevalent.
Well, it's, again, when we talk about, men in particular, I think the number is, the last I looked, is 105 men every day in America kill themselves.
Wow.
And I don't think that means that men are weak. I think that means men aren't able to handle these really, really strong emotions because we're not taught. And so when we have these really, really strong emotions, we don't know what to do with them. The easiest, in some ways, it's sad to say, the easiest answer is to end it, because then you don't feel any pain, right? That's your clouded mind's way of finding a solution. And if we just got better at being able to deal with these emotions, it's okay to cry if you're a man. It's okay to hurt. It's okay to have pain. It's okay to express that you're hurting. We don't have to white knuckle through life. It's okay to ask for help.
There you go. I was getting ready to say that. Yep. Let's end with a positive. Let's talk about dating.
All right. I thought you said positive.
So my story was I was in the middle of my divorce and I started dating. And I started dating way too soon. And I got some crazies and I didn't realize it. And I kept dating. And I think what you said before, that it prevents you from totally healing or even start to heal because you get into these crazy relationships. And man, I picked the first couple. They were just like my ex-wife. It was amazing. Like, I mean, verbatim. It's like, come on, seriously. But yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. It was crazy though, but I had a blast. I just want to tell you, I had a blast.
I had a lot of fun. I mean, in the moment, I had a ton of fun. I mean, I went wild, but it didn't ultimately help. But I think the question is, why work on yourself? Why heal? And if nothing else, it's so you don't repeat the past, and that includes finding a mate that is similar. Because again, if you don't learn who you are and how you tick and all these things, then you're never going to learn what works and ticks with you, right? Mm-hmm. And when we don't do that, spend that time alone to really understand ourselves, and we just look for something to fill that void, we'll take anything. It's like someone starving will take any crumb they can find. And I know in the beginning it's very, very hard. I was guilty. I'm guilty. I did it too. I was dating 3 weeks after she was gone. I was on those apps. I had a lot of meaningless sex, for sure.
Darn it. Darn, Michael. Darn.
But it didn't help at all. I mean, in the moment, of course, right? Who doesn't like sex? It's like pizza. Even bad pizza is good pizza, right? So I had fun. But it wasn't fruitful in the long run. Yeah. To your point, you find yourselves in situations like, well, this is not a healthy relationship. This is not this is not helping at all. In fact, it exacerbates it. It makes it worse.
Yep.
And I think that's why it's really important to take that time so you don't repeat the past. If nothing else, obviously you want to heal, you want to grow. All those things are true and necessary, but good Lord, I do not want to repeat this ever.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not talking marriage. I'm just talking the pain of being in a bad relationship.
Yeah. And you don't realize how bad it is until it's over.
Very true.
like the armchair quarterback is huge after you go through the process and you're done and you look back and you go, man, that kind of makes sense now, how that happened or how she acted. But Mr. Mike, man, I want to thank you. That was a blast.
You're welcome, man. I can't believe it's been almost an hour.
We're going to do this again because I think we just scratched the surface. But we want to thank everybody for listening and Mike for taking time from his busy Facebook schedule.
You did have to pull me away, didn't you?
Hey, dude, what's up? How you doing?
For those who don't know, I was giving a little talk in my Facebook group, and David popped in and was like, where you at, man?
So go ahead and tell everybody where to find you, and we're going to have all the blurbs at the bottom of the wording, I guess. But talk about your podcast and your coaching, everything going on.
Yep. Yeah, so the best place to find me is my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. There's links to my YouTube channel. There's links to the podcast website, which is risingphoenixpodcast.com. There's information about my coaching program. I have a 16-week coaching program you can check out. I am, as David said, I'm stretched pretty thin, so I hate to sound salesy, but I only have one spot available for a client right now. I have
last spot.
I really pared down. It really is. It's not a sales pitch. I promise. I only have capacity really for two. I have one guy right now who's in his 4th week. And the podcast itself, you can find it on Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, all those good apps that everyone uses.
15-minute timer. All right, Mike, I want to thank you for taking time to hang out with us, and we wish everybody to have a good night. All right.